The moment she appeared, the room contracted, not literally, but the air itself seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest and filling every corner of the kitchen with a cold, sorrowful weight. My friend stumbled backward, tripping over the fallen chair, and I barely caught him. The envelope, the metal box it had been resting in, shivered like a heartbeat as if the paper inside knew what was happening. The photograph had been a warning, that much was clear now. But the living presence, the suggestion of the brown lady herself, was something else entirely. She did not move like a human. She descended, or perhaps existed, in increments, as though the very laws of motion were hers to rewrite. Each moment she lingered, the air hummed with the faint whisper of her veil against unseen steps. The smell of ancient lavender stronger now, clinging to her clothes, our hair, our lungs. I wanted to run. I wanted to flee, slam doors, escape into the streets where the city might offer some ordinary reality. But instinct faltered. Fear was no longer immediate. It had been replaced by a bone-deep comprehension that the act of movement, of acknowledging her, had tethered us. We were now part of the descent. Our presence had extended the chain. We had watched the photograph. We had opened doors, and now there was no escape from watching the stairs she imagined, or the ones she made real wherever she appeared. My friend's voice was a whisper, trembling with disbelief. We have to get it back. The photograph, back where it started. I nodded. Words felt useless. Even thinking was heavy, like running through water. Outside the windows, the city hummed peacefully, oblivious. Ordinary people moved down steps, unaware of what invisible threads of grief and motion wove beneath them. And that made it worse. The world could not see her, but we could. We had seen, and that made her real, tangibly, impossibly real. The brown lady didn't speak. She didn't need to. She exuded intention. Each moment of her being there filled the room with the sense that time itself had been bent to her will. I could feel the pattern of the descent in my mind. Each step a pulse, a rhythm of inevitability. And then, almost imperceptibly, the metal box vibrated again, a subtle warning, as though the photograph within knew it could no longer be contained in paper alone. My friend shook me by the shoulder. We have to move now, he urged, urgency cutting through the paralysis of awe and terror. We grabbed the envelope together, careful not to let it touch anything else. The air immediately felt lighter, or at least less insistent, but I could still smell her presence, faint yet omnipresent, like a shadow lingering in a corner you refused to see. The descent, the motion, had not ceased. We were only delaying it, postponing the inevitable confrontation that awaited us somewhere far beyond these walls. We left the apartment, careful not to glance at the stairwell, careful not to acknowledge anything but the envelope. Outside, the early morning sun made the streets feel unreal, ordinary and safe, but every stair we passed sent a shiver down my spine. Each descending motion, people walking, escalators carrying commuters, resonated like a silent drumbeat that echoed the rhythm of the brown lady's steps. Even the most mundane stairs now carried a weight we could feel but no one else would understand. We drove through the city in tense silence, avoiding any place that suggested the descent could continue. Yet deep inside, I knew it was impossible. Wherever we carried the photograph, wherever the story traveled, we would find a threshold. She would descend, and she would lead. Patience was her weapon, endurance her nature, and the inevitable question now pressed heavily into my chest. Who or what waited at the bottom of that descent, ready to follow? By the time we reached a quiet, secluded place, the city behind us, I allowed myself to breathe, only for a moment. The photograph still lay between us, silent, yet alive with some hidden pulse. The scent of lavender persisted, faint but unmistakable, reminding me that the ritual had not ended. It had only moved, and now we carried it into the unknown, fully aware that this was only the beginning of the descent's reach, and that every step beyond this point would pull us further into a story far older, far darker than either of us had imagined. We found a place to stop, a small, nondescript storage facility on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place that promised isolation and anonymity. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a harsh glare over concrete floors and metal shelves stacked with forgotten boxes. I placed the envelope carefully on an empty pallet, my hand still trembling from the drive. My friend paced, muttering under his breath, as though speaking aloud might somehow stave off the inevitable, might make the descent pause. But deep down, we both knew it was a futile gesture. The brown lady wasn't something that obeyed human rules or convenience. She followed the rhythm of thresholds, of motion, of recognition. Once seen, she had a way of extending herself, reaching across space and time with the inevitability of a tide. I studied the envelope on the pallet. It seemed innocent now, a simple piece of paper and a photograph, flat and still. But the memory of what had happened, the way the air had thickened, the way the veil of the brown had brushed across our vision without sound, made it feel like a living thing. It pulsed with latent motion, with the echo of steps she had already taken, and perhaps with steps yet to come. My friend knelt beside it, carefully opening the box that had contained it, peering at the photograph, as though studying it closely might reveal some instruction manual for survival. I leaned in beside him, stomach churning. The image had not changed, but the knowledge we carried made it more terrifying. We were now participants in her ritual, observers who had invited her presence simply by noticing, simply by acknowledging the descent. We debated what to do next. Return it to the collector in England. Perhaps he could seal it back within the lineage of Raynham Hall, but the logistics were daunting, and every moment spent deliberating felt like a stolen step in the ongoing descent. The photograph had already moved with us. The ritual had already extended beyond its original boundaries. I realized then that we weren't just carrying a story, we were carrying a vector, a living motion that could not be constrained, and yet we had to try. There was no other choice, even in fear, in terror, and the choking lavender air that seemed to follow us like an invisible leash. We knew leaving it here in this small, empty storage unit was not enough. As night fell over the city, we made our preparations, a careful, almost ceremonial packing of the envelope into multiple layers of protective envelopes and containers, each a barrier against the inevitable motion. Every precaution felt simultaneously ridiculous and essential. My friend double-checked the locks, the seals, the orientation of the envelope itself. I kept glancing over my shoulder, certain I could see the faint shimmer of her from drifting just beyond the walls of the storage facility. Though I told myself it was exhaustion, yet deep down I knew the truth. She could appear anywhere, at any threshold, as long as someone had seen her, as long as the story persisted. By the time we finished, the facility was silent, the fluorescent lights flickering faintly as if in sync with the rhythm of the world, which had suddenly become a sequence of descending steps. I left the envelope on the pallet, staring at it for a long moment, and whispered a silent plea, not that she would stop, but that we might be spared the first encounter with whatever waited at the bottom of her endless descent. We walked out into the night, the city beyond still bustling and ordinary, unaware that every stair, every threshold, every unnoticed corner was now a stage for something older, more patient, and infinitely more persistent than any human could comprehend. And in the shadows, as we disappeared into the quiet streets, the faintest echo of a creaking stair reached us, like a reminder that the descent had not ended, it had only shifted, and that perhaps nothing ever truly stops the Brown Lady, because she was not a ghost to be contained. She was a motion, a pattern, a sorrowful inevitability stretching beyond time, dragging all who had seen her into the rhythm of the descent. By the final night of her ordeal, the city felt alien. Ordinary staircases became terrifying thresholds, mundane steps, carrying the potential to summon her motion into reality. My friend and I had returned home separately, each unable to bear the proximity of the other, both carrying the same tension, the same knowledge that nothing, neither walls, nor locks, nor distance could contain her presence once recognized. Every creak in the floorboards, every soft whisper of wind against the building became a signal, a reminder that the Brown Lady's descent was not beyond by geography or reason, only by the awareness of those who had seen her. The photograph, now carefully sealed away in protective layers, had become more than an image. It was a vessel, a threshold itself, a single flare to the inevitability of her passage. I spent hours pacing my apartment, avoiding the stairwell entirely, keeping my eyes on every hallway, every door. Even the sound of my own footsteps made me flinch, as though my motion could draw her attention or worse, encourage the continuation of her descent. And then, as midnight approached, it happened again, a creaking sound, slow and patient, just beyond the door, moving downward, not hurried, not violent, but deliberate, like the patient pull of time itself. The lavender scent filled the apartment, this time so strong it seemed to press against my chest and curl into my lungs. I froze aware of every heartbeat, every shallow intake of breath, every pulse of anticipation. The veil appeared faintly at first, an outline of sorrow and brown fabric brushing the air, descending in the increments that defied physics, as if the very concept of steps had become her domain. I did not move, I could not. And then, in the darkness of the hallway, I realized something more terrifying than the apparition itself. She was no longer alone. Faint, barely perceptible, there was something trailing her, a shadow, an echo, a presence indistinct yet palpable, moving in the same deliberate rhythm. The letters we had read, the warnings of the collector, the stories from Raynham Hall, they all pointed to this. The Brown Lady was a guide, and that what followed her was the true peril. My heart hammered as I watched the space between the stairwell and my apartment door thicken with invisible weight. My mind screamed to act, to flee, to shut the door and hide. But even that would not stop the motion she commanded. She was a force, bound to the descent, and now the descent had a companion, an unknown continuation, a dark momentum that would not pause for disbelief or fear. I sat down, paralyzed, the envelope on the table in front of me, a fragile barrier against something I could no longer name. Minutes, or was it hours, passed in silence, filled only with the hum of the city outside and the softest whisper of fabric brushing air. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the presence retreated. The lavender scent faded, the hallway quieted, and the apartment returned to ordinary dimensions. The relief was temporary, fragile, and tainted by the knowledge that this pattern would repeat. I realized that the Brown Lady's descent was eternal, a motion that could not be stopped, only observed and respected. The ritual persisted not because she desired it, but because she was tied to thresholds, to motion, and to those who acknowledged her existence. I understood, finally, that this story, our story, was a continuation of the original legend. The Brown Lady was no longer merely a ghost of Raynham Hall. She had become something more expansive, an inevitability that could cross cities, continents, and time itself, so long as witnesses existed. And those witnesses, once aware, became participants in the rhythm of her descent. The photograph was a key, the envelope a conduit, and we were now forever part of the pattern. I knew that no matter how far I traveled, no matter how carefully I isolated the image, the descent would persist, patient and unrelenting, and in that knowledge, a cold clarity settled over me. Some stories are never meant to end. Some ghosts are not confined to walls, floors, or ceilings. Some, like the Brown Lady, are bound only to motion, and once seen, they never stop descending.